What's with the economics of unaliving your customers? How does that even work? If your customers aren't alive, they can't buy anything from you. That's like economics 101. First, a quick explanation about the strange wording we're using. We're posting here on YouTube first, so we're saying unalive, not the other word, because this is a baby website, forcing us to talk like babies, or our video will be thrown into the black hole of restricted YouTube, never to be seen again. Mark Twain once said, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. 'Tis the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." On YouTube, we are forced to use lightning bug words. If you are seeing this someplace other than YouTube, we will still say unalive because we're not going to re-edit. Anyways, back to the story. A surprising number of industries unalive their customers. The chemical industry is all over reports of unaliving, and let's not forget the tobacco industry. But for this video, we're going to focus on one industry, one illegal industry, fentanyl. At this moment in history, there is no other substance unaliving more people. Fentanyl was created with good intentions, and for years was only used in medicine. It would take a multinational company pushing a completely different medicine to start the crisis that would lead to the fentanyl problems we have now. Was it a conspiracy by this company? Yes. Yes, it was, and we have the proof because it all played out in court. This company's illegal actions led to the widespread drug epidemic we have today. This drug epidemic led directly to the fentanyl crisis and the unaliving of countless people around the world. For this video, we will mostly focus on the US, but this crisis is really worldwide. Finally, we will get personal with a story about a friend of historian Matt, the writer of this script. That friend was named David. But first, the sponsor. There is no sponsor for this video. Instead, we recommend donating to the SAFE Project. The SAFE Project is a national nonprofit fighting the opioid and addiction epidemic by working with communities, campuses, workplaces, and active duty service members, veterans, and their families. Their vision is to save lives impacted by substance use and mental health challenges through prevention, overdose response, education, stigma reduction, access to treatment, and the development of recovery programs. You can donate to the SAFE Project at safeproject.us or just click on the link in the description on this video. Again, this is not a sponsor. We do not get any of the money you donate to the SAFE Project. They don't even know we're telling you to donate to them. We just think it's the right thing to do. Fentanyl. In the late 1950s, Belgian pharmacologist Paul Janssen and founder of Janssen Pharmaceutica had a problem. The available opioids of the time were too weak and slow acting. This is probably surprising for most people watching this video, but there was a good reason to worry about the slow action of these opioids. Doctors were using these drugs for both pain management and anesthesia, putting people to sleep for surgery. Anesthesia was the big one here. Having a slow-acting drug for anesthesia was a big problem, as doctors would have to wait potentially hours for morphine or meperidine to put patients to sleep before surgery. What are doctors going to do with all that time? Play solitaire until the patient is ready? This was the 1950s. They didn't have smartphones or even computers. They had to play solitaire with real playing cards, like animals. In 1960, Paul Janssen found a solution, a far faster acting drug called fentanyl. How was it able to achieve this? Fentanyl could easily cross the blood-brain barrier. You know, those bouncers standing at the door to the brain ready to keep out anyone who doesn't play nice in the brain club. This ability to cross the blood-brain barrier not only allowed fentanyl to act faster, but it was also far more potent. Fentanyl is thought to be 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, which allows doctors to use far less to have a similar effect. Fentanyl could still be used for pain management. Its fast-acting nature made it great for breakthrough pain, the type of pain that blasts through the wall of other pain management drugs like the Kool-Aid Man. By the 1970s, we had a fast-acting drug useful for anesthesia and breakthrough pain management. Great! And that will be the end of this video, if not for another company. Really, the family behind that company. That company is Purdue Pharma, and that family is the Sackler family. They were the origins of the opioid crisis we have today, and the ones to pave the way for fentanyl to go from a drug used exclusively by doctors to one of the most dangerous street drugs of our time. Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. In the early 1990s, Purdue Pharma's flagship product, MS-Contin, neared its patent expiration. They needed a new major drug to replace MS-Contin. After some research, they decided on a little-known drug called OxyContin. This choice and the aggressive marketing by Purdue Pharma eventually led to the opioid crisis we are living with today. OxyContin is a powerful opioid used by doctors primarily for pain management. At the time, OxyContin was mixed with either aspirin, known as Percodan, or acetaminophen, known as Percocet. This was great for pain management, but the addition of aspirin or acetaminophen limited the amount of mixed drug a patient could take, as the aspirin or acetaminophen would cause liver damage if too much was taken. So, what did Purdue Pharma do first? They removed the additional drugs to make an OxyContin-only pill. That's great, but now you have a pure opioid pill that's just asking for abuse. The FDA is going to throw the Pope of Nope card on that pill. What does Purdue Pharma do? They put it in a controlled release matrix, which would slow the release of OxyContin and reduce the risk of abuse, as abusers would want a fast-acting, quick hit of the drug. That's great if the controlled release matrix actually worked as advertised. In 1995, the FDA approved the drug. Great for Purdue Pharma. The FDA even allowed them to market the drug with the statement, "Delayed absorption, as provided by OxyContin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug." Double great! Never mind, the statement was really a very weak claim with little evidence the slow release really worked. The new drug, OxyContin, was officially launched in 1996. While Percodan and Percocet were marketed for cancer pain management, OxyContin would be marketed for virtually any chronic pain. Think back pain, sports injuries, even post-operative discomfort. Basically everything. With that, Purdue Pharma doubled their sales force, nearly tripled the physician call list, and pushed their marketing budget to $200 million. Even with all that money, Purdue Pharma still had a problem with this marketing. It's what they call opiophobia, which is just a made-up word for how doctors are trained to be wary of addiction and opioids. So they started pushing the idea that OxyContin was not addictive. This was all based on the long release time of the drug, that thing that was never thoroughly tested. Then there was the Porter and Jick distortion. This refers to a letter to the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine by Jane Porter and Dr. Herschel Jick. In the letter, they reported on 11,882 hospitalized patients treated with small doses of narcotics under strict supervision. Of those patients, only 4 showed signs of addiction. But remember, this was just a letter to the editor, not a peer-reviewed study. Purdue Pharma, on the other hand, decided this was a landmark study proving that addiction was rare in patients taking opioids for long periods of time. They purposefully applied this finding in a specific group of patients under strict supervision to an entirely different group of patients just hanging out in the world. Dr. Herschel Jick would later testify that he was unaware this letter was being used in this way, saying, "That's not in any shape or form what we suggested in our letter." Purdue Pharma also corrupted the Federation of State Medical Boards, the FSMB, by granting them over $800,000 between 2001 and 2008. These grants led to guidelines by the FSMB reassuring doctors that they would not be prosecuted for prescribing large amounts of opioids, provided they documented the medical need. Later, these guidelines began to resemble threats that doctors could be sued if they were undertreating pain, which led to doctors prescribing more opioids. Probably the most sadistic concept Purdue Pharma ran with in their marketing was the concept of pseudo-addiction. This was the idea that some drug-seeking behaviors like asking for higher doses, aggressive demands, and running out of pills early were not signs of addiction, but pseudo-addiction. They argued these signs just mimicked addiction and were really a plea for more relief from pain. Their solution? More opioids at higher doses, of course. Then there were the issues with the dose schedule. Remember the long-lasting 12-hour relief that Purdue Pharma claimed OxyContin would give patients? Well, some early clinical trials revealed that OxyContin would wear off in under 6 hours for about 25% of patients, and in under 10 hours for 50%. This means half of all patients couldn't make it to the next dose without experiencing withdrawal symptoms. But Purdue Pharma refused to change the dose schedule as the 12-hour schedule was vital to the brand's identity. If it didn't last 12 hours, OxyContin would be just like every other opioid out there. This cycle of pain followed by relief with OxyContin, only to be followed with withdrawal and relief again with OxyContin, is basically Pavlovian conditioning. This is the fastest way to train somebody into a drug addiction. What was Purdue Pharma's solution? They couldn't shorten the dose schedule, so they decided higher doses of OxyContin would solve the problem, or at least the problem of their wallets not being filled with enough cash. By the year 2000, reports of abuse and overdose were beginning to circulate. So much OxyContin was getting diverted out of the hospital and away from patients that it was being called the hottest thing on the street. What does Purdue Pharma do about these reports? Maybe look at their sales strategy or reform the dose schedule? Heck no, they blame the victims, with an executive saying in an email, "We have to hammer on abusers in every way possible." This was all part of their strategy to pass off the problem as criminal abuse rather than medical addiction. This was all to avoid any liability for causing the addiction crisis. Now that the country had an opioid problem, Purdue Pharma couldn't let a good crisis go to waste, so they created Project Tango, which was a plan to fix the opioid crisis by expanding the addiction treatment market. They started selling more drugs like Suboxone and Narcan, both treatments for opioid addiction. Now they could profit from both the cause of the crisis and the solution. We know all of this because of legal cases against Purdue Pharma that started in the mid-2000s. Purdue Pharma would file for bankruptcy in 2019. A separate case against the Sackler family made it all the way to the Supreme Court in 2024, where a settlement was blocked which would have allowed the Sackler family to keep most of the money they made by creating the crisis. The Sackler family could still be held liable for the opioid crisis and have all of their money clawed back to pay for treatment for all the people who had their lives ruined by Purdue Pharma's reckless marketing of OxyContin. OxyContin to fentanyl. By 2010, Purdue Pharma couldn't ignore or hide the opioid crisis they created anymore. OxyContin was showing up on the street all over the US. They finally decided to take some action to stop the abuse of OxyContin, not only in the US, but also around the world. First, they pulled the original OxyContin from the market and released a new abuse deterrent formula. The original OxyContin could easily be crushed into powder, which would bypass the 12-hour time release mechanism. Anyone who wanted to abuse OxyContin could use this method to get the entire dose of the active ingredient oxycodone all at once. The new formula resisted crushing and would turn into a gel if it got wet after it was crushed. This meant the usual ways people would abuse the drug were not possible anymore. At the same time Purdue Pharma was reformulating OxyContin to make it abuse-resistant, law enforcement and legislators began an effort to shut down pill mills. Before 2011, 90 of the top 100 physicians purchasing oxycodone were located in Florida. All that OxyContin, no wonder Florida man is impervious to pain. Then Florida implemented a prescription drug monitoring program and prohibited physicians from dispensing narcotics on site. So all this work ending OxyContin abuse solved the opioid crisis, right? Nope. They stopped the abuse of OxyContin, but they didn't do anything about all the people already addicted. That's when the Mexican cartels stepped in with heroin to take the place of OxyContin on the street. The change from OxyContin to heroin also changed the way people took the drug, which led to a secondary crisis of infectious diseases. This was the first way, after straight-up overdoses, the economics of opioids led to unaliving masses of people. Then, fentanyl and other synthetic opioids started showing up and replacing heroin on the street. This is where the economics of the drugs really kicked in to unalive even more people. But why? Why would dealers switch from heroin, which is dangerous but not nearly as much as the synthetic drugs they switched to like fentanyl? Here are the numbers. To make 1 kilogram of heroin, that's about 2.2 pounds in freedom units, you would need to grow about 2 football fields worth of poppy, compared to 1 kilogram fentanyl, which could be made in a space of about 18 square meters, or about 21 square yards. To grow the poppy that would be made into heroin, you would have to wait months until it's ready. Fentanyl can be synthesized in days. The precursors for fentanyl, the chemicals you need to make fentanyl, can be imported for between $3,000 to $5,000 per kilogram. Heroin can cost $25,000. For doses, 1 kilogram of heroin is about 10,000 doses, while 1 kilogram of fentanyl is about 500,000 doses. That's the whole 50 times more potent thing we mentioned at the beginning of this video. Finally, the street price of heroin is mostly stable, but the street price of an equivalent dose of fentanyl is falling rapidly, which means fentanyl is much cheaper for users seeking out high. With fentanyl's much higher potency, the drug can be smuggled across the border in much lower batches, which means law enforcement has a much harder time detecting it. Overall, fentanyl ends up costing 98% less than heroin, while still allowing the cartels to profit massively. Fentanyl is so cheap, it's starting to show up in counterfeit drugs that mimic legitimate medications like Xanax, Adderall, Vicodin, and ironically, OxyContin. These drugs are marketed through social media and e-commerce platforms, making them accessible to anyone online. But these fake pills are still dangerous, with as much as 7 in 10 pills seized by the DEA containing an unalive dose. U.S. teenagers aged 14 to 18 overdose unalive rate rose by 94%, of which fentanyl accounted for 77%. Many of these teens thought they were ingesting a prescribed medication only to get an unalive dose of fentanyl from a fake pill. Fentanyl is also contaminating much of the illegal drug supply. In 2023, nearly 47% of overdose unalives involve both an opioid and a stimulant like cocaine or methamphetamine. Fentanyl is getting into everything, even the drugs you don't expect. It's causing a crisis everywhere. The unalive rate is so high for fentanyl that the Mexican cartels are starting to look for new revenue sources. They've begun to go into the avocado growing industry. Some research suggests a 10% increase in the fentanyl overdose rate in the US is associated with a 2% increase in the unalive rate in Mexico regions suitable for avocado growing. Think of that the next time you get extra guacamole at Chipotle. So there you have it, the economics behind fentanyl and the overdose crisis we have in the US. But if this hasn't convinced you of the seriousness of the crisis, we will leave you with a final story. David's story. Again, this is a personal story about a friend of historian Matt named David. I, in this context, refers to historian Matt, the writer of all the videos on this channel. I met David at a meetup event. At the time, I was organizing a skeptics meetup that was originally created by Sylph, the first voiceover artist for this channel. Organizing the meetup was mostly deciding on a date and time and location. We found a nice little bakery in Sunnyvale with a big table in the back, which seemed to be made for meetup groups. Sylph showed up with David, who he recently met at a comic convention. I don't remember everything we talked about that night, but someone brought up the name of a particular male porn star known for his particularly large, member. David just had to look up who this porn star was and find a picture of him. This led to David waving around his phone with a pic of a porn star with a massive member just out there. This was in a bakery, a family-friendly place. Though we weren't back, the way the bakery was designed, another family-friendly burger restaurant was in clear view of our table. I thought we were going to get kicked out of the bakery and I would have had to find another place for the meetup or shut the whole thing down out of embarrassment. Finally, David calmed down and put away his phone without incident. About 15 minutes later, David checks his phone, notices the porn star pic was still on his phone, and starts waving it around again and making a bunch of noise. I nearly died. Needless to say, I liked him right from the start. David was a funny man. Though he couldn't do that for a living, he seemed to be constantly preparing and practicing for a day when that would be possible. David always kept a little black book with him where he would jot down anything he thought was funny. The ultimate goal was to collect enough jokes and funny ideas to put together a stand-up routine. I don't know if he ever performed a stand-up in the past. The next one always seemed to be in the distant future. As with everyone who thinks they are funny, David joined an improv group. This was one type of performance he seemed to do regularly. I was never able to see one of his shows, I regret that now. But his greatest performance, one I did get to see, didn't happen on a stage. That performance happened in the game GTA 5 Online. If you've ever tried GTA 5 Online, you'll know that it is nearly impossible to play. Between trolls and griefers everywhere, and game hacks constant with the creator, Rockstar, refusing to fix, the only way to really make any progress was just to play online in a friends-only session. I don't know if Rockstar ever fixed the hacks in GTA 5, I haven't played in a long time. David didn't do the friends-only sessions. He loved to troll the trolls and grief the griefers, and he was great at it. There is no way I could describe what he did and give his performance justice. I can only say that it was masterful. If you were not the target, it was awe-inspiring. If you were the target, well, you were probably rage quitting. David was always coming up with little comedy sketches and ideas. It was almost like street comedy sketches, but they were most likely part of David's work to put together a stand-up routine. Every now and then, he would come up with some funny idea and he would just take it as far as he could. One day, I ran into him going absolutely crazy at a house party. He and Sylph had come up with this idea for a comedy sketch where there was some sort of vendor at a baseball game yelling to the audience to try to get a sale. But the things that they had for sale were some of the worst and weirdest things you could think of. They had spiders on the half bun, metal Cheerios, think nuts and bolts, hot Cheetos and sand, heated Cheetos pushed into sand, habanero lemonade, and gusher fluid squeezed directly from gushers candy right in front of you. The one item that stood out, the one they kept coming back to over and over again, was ice cream on a hot dog. He'd yell, "Ice cream on a hot dog, we got your ice cream on a hot dog." They kept coming back to it so much, they finally decided to try it. Why? I don't know. Did it go well? No. That's just the way David was sometimes. They found his body in a parking garage. He was in his car, getting ready to go to an anime conference. He was found dressed as Doctor Who. Somehow, his costume seemed appropriate for David. While getting ready for the conference, David took something to get in the mood. What he didn't know was whatever he took included a small amount of fentanyl. He didn't want anyone to know what he was doing to get ready for the conference, so there was no one there to revive him when things got out of hand. That one time and small amount of fentanyl was enough to end his life. He died in his car, in a parking garage, dressed as Doctor Who, alone. I wish regeneration was real and those who dress as Doctor Who could do it, but that is not the world we live in. The true cost of unaliving your customers is not the revenue you will miss out on, but what society will miss out on. Somewhere there is a little black book filled with jokes that will never become a stand-up routine. There is an improv group missing a member. Online, there are some GTA trolls who need to be harassed. And there will be no more ice cream on a hot dog.